Most people think they already know the dangerous habits. Smoking, sitting all day, eating too much sugar, those are the villains everyone points to. But after more than 2 decades in cardiac surgery, I can tell you the habit that sends more people to my operating table than almost anything else isn't on that list at all. It isn't dramatic. It isn't something anyone warns you about. And it happens in the last 30 minutes before you fall asleep. Every single night, in almost every home in this country. Tonight, I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. I'm going to show you why it's more dangerous than people realize, and I'm going to give you a simple way to undo the damage starting tonight. Stay with me until the end, because the second half of this video may be the most important thing you hear all year. And I want to be clear about something before we go any further. This isn't a video about avoiding technology in general, and it isn't a lecture about screen time for its own sake. Plenty of habits involving screens are harmless during the day. This is specifically about the final half hour before sleep, a narrow window most people never think twice about, and it happens to be the exact window where your heart is most vulnerable to disruption. Let me start with something most people don't know about their own heart. Your cardiovascular system doesn't clock out when you go to bed. It shifts into a completely different mode, a maintenance mode. Blood pressure drops, heart rate slows, your arteries relax. This is supposed to happen every single night. It's one of the most important repair windows your body has. But here's the problem. That repair window is fragile. It's easy to disrupt. And the thing that disrupts it most isn't a food, it isn't a drink, it isn't even a medication. It's a behavior. One that feels completely harmless. One that almost everyone does without a second thought. I want you to think back to last night. Think about the 30 minutes before you actually fell asleep. For most people over the age of 50, that window looks almost identical, night after night. Lying in bed, phone in hand, scrolling. A few messages, a news headline, a video, another video, and then suddenly it's been 40 minutes and you're still not asleep. It feels relaxing. It feels like winding down. It is the opposite of that. And I need you to understand exactly why. Here's what's actually happening inside your body during those 40 minutes. The light from your phone, especially the blue wavelength light, hits receptors in your eyes that are directly connected to a tiny structure in your brain responsible for regulating your internal clock. That structure reads bright light as a signal that it is daytime. In response, it suppresses melatonin, the hormone your body needs to lower your heart rate and prepare your cardiovascular system for its nightly reset. At the exact moment your heart should be receiving the signal to slow down, your phone is quietly telling your brain the opposite. And melatonin isn't the only thing affected. Scrolling activates your nervous system in ways most people never notice. A stressful headline, an argument in a comment section, an alarming news alert, each one triggers a small release of cortisol and adrenaline, the same stress hormones involved in a fight or flight response. Your heart rate ticks up. Your blood pressure rises slightly. Your body prepares for a threat that doesn't exist. Then, 30 seconds later, you close the phone, turn off the light, and expect your cardiovascular system to immediately downshift into deep, restorative sleep. It cannot do that. Not that quickly. Not after being told again and again that there's something out there to react to. For a younger heart, this is an inconvenience. Maybe it takes an extra 20 minutes to fall asleep. The body compensates. But after the age of 50, and especially after 60, the margin for error narrows considerably. Arteries are stiffer. Blood pressure regulation is less precise. The nightly 10 to 20% dip in blood pressure that your body depends on for cardiovascular protection becomes harder to achieve if your nervous system is still activated when your head hits the pillow. And here's the part that shocks most of my patients when I explain it in a recovery room. The people who scroll on their phones right before bed are not falling asleep in a calm, rested state. They are falling asleep in a mildly activated state with elevated cortisol, elevated heart rate, and suppressed melatonin. And they are doing it for years without ever connecting it to their cardiovascular health. Let me ask you something directly. What does your bedside table actually look like right now? Is your phone within arm's reach of your pillow? Is it the last thing you touch before you close your eyes and the first thing you touch when you open them? If you're being honest with yourself, The answer is probably yes. You are far from alone. In my experience, more than 70% of patients over 50 admit to using their phone in bed every single night, and almost none of them had ever considered what that habit was doing to their heart. Now, I want to walk you through exactly why this becomes dangerous. Not just uncomfortable, dangerous. Sleep happens in stages, and the deepest, most restorative stage, the one where your heart does its most important overnight repair work, typically occurs in the first few hours of the night. If it takes you 45 minutes of scrolling and stress hormones to actually fall asleep, you are pushing that critical repair window later and later. Some nights, you may not reach deep restorative sleep until well past midnight, right as your risk profile for cardiac events begins climbing toward its highest point of the entire day. The hours between midnight and 6 in the morning already carry the greatest risk of heart attack and stroke for people over 60. Delaying deep sleep into that exact window night after night is like showing up late and unprepared to the most dangerous part of your day. I want to pause here for a moment because there's a question I know some of you are already asking. What about people who say they sleep just fine after scrolling on their phone? They fall asleep in 10 minutes, they wake up feeling rested, so surely this doesn't apply to them. I understand that reasoning, and I hear it constantly. But feeling rested and being cardiovascularly protected are not the same thing. Subjective sleep quality, whether you feel groggy or refreshed in the morning, is not a reliable measure of what happened to your blood pressure, your cortisol, or your heart rate at 2 in the morning. Many of my patients who eventually needed surgery told me right up until the day of their event that they slept perfectly fine. The damage I'm describing tonight doesn't announce itself with grogginess. It accumulates silently underneath a sleep pattern that can feel completely normal on the surface. There's a second layer to this that almost nobody talks about, and it has to do with posture. Most people don't scroll sitting upright. They lie down, phone held above their face, neck bent forward, sometimes for 30 or 40 minutes at a time. That position places sustained pressure on the carotid sinus, a small cluster of receptors in your neck responsible for helping regulate blood pressure. In older adults, especially those with any degree of arterial stiffness, prolonged pressure in that area can interfere with the body's natural blood pressure signaling right at the moment it should be preparing to drop for the night. It's a small mechanical detail, but combined with suppressed melatonin and elevated stress hormones, it adds another obstacle standing between you and a truly restorative night's sleep. I had a patient, a retired school teacher, 64 years old, who came to me after a cardiac event that genuinely surprised her family. No history of smoking, reasonably active, ate well by most standards. When I asked about her evening routine, she described exactly what I just told you. Dinner around 7, then 2 hours of television, and finally in bed by 10, scrolling through her phone until she felt tired enough to put it down, usually somewhere around 11. She had done this for years. She had no idea that the single habit she considered her wind-down routine was actually keeping her cardiovascular system activated during the exact hours it needed to rest the most. I'm not telling you her phone caused her cardiac event on its own. Very few things in cardiology work that simply. But I am telling you that this pattern, repeated for years, chips away at the margin of safety your heart depends on, and in her case, along with several other contributing factors, that margin had worn dangerously thin. There's a second measurement that most people have never heard of, but that tells this story even more clearly than blood pressure alone, and that's heart rate variability. This is a measure of the tiny fluctuations between each heartbeat, and counterintuitively, more variability is a sign of a healthy, well-regulated cardiovascular system. When your nervous system is calm, your heart rate adjusts smoothly and responsively, beat to beat. When your nervous system is activated, even mildly, that variability flattens out. Your heart begins beating in a more rigid, less adaptive pattern. In the small studies that have looked at phone use in the hour before sleep, this is exactly what researchers found. Heart rate variability dropped, and it stayed suppressed well into the early hours of sleep, even in people who reported no difficulty falling asleep at all. This is the piece I most want you to understand tonight. The evidence isn't only about how long it takes you to fall asleep. It's about the internal state your cardiovascular system is left in for hours afterward, invisible to you, but very real to your heart. I had another patient, a retired contractor, 71 years old, built like someone who had worked with his hands his entire life. Strong, active, no family history that concerned me particularly. He came in after what his wife described as a frightening night, waking up gasping, chest tightness that resolved on its own before paramedics arrived, but enough to bring him in for a full evaluation. When we talked through his evening routine, he laughed a little, almost embarrassed, and told me he watched what he called doom scroll videos most nights, current events, arguments online, sometimes 45 minutes at a time, right up until his eyes got heavy enough to close on their own. He didn't see the connection at first. Why would scrolling through headlines have anything to do with his heart? But once I walked him through exactly what I've walked you through tonight, the suppressed melatonin, the elevated cortisol, the flattened heart rate variability, all of it landing directly in the hours his heart depended on most for recovery, it made sense to him immediately. He made one change. He stopped the moment the lights went off, no exceptions, and moved his phone to the kitchen counter overnight. 6 months later, his numbers had genuinely improved, and he told me it was the easiest change he'd ever made, mostly because he never actually missed it once the habit was broken. Here's what makes this particular habit more dangerous than the ones people usually worry about. A heavy meal before bed is something people at least suspect might not be great for them. Alcohol before sleep. Most people already know carries some risk, but scrolling on a phone feels neutral. It feels like rest. Nobody warns you about it. There's no label on it the way there is on a bottle of wine. It has slipped completely under the radar of cardiovascular health advice, even though the mechanism, delayed melatonin, elevated cortisol, delayed deep sleep, pushed directly into the highest risk window of the night, is entirely real and well documented. So, what do you actually do about this? I want to be very clear that I'm not telling you to throw your phone across the room and never look at it again. That's not realistic, and it's not necessary. What I am telling you is that timing and distance matter enormously, and small adjustments here produce outsized protection for your heart. The first adjustment is what I call the 60-minute rule. Stop using your phone and any bright screen for that matter 60 minutes before you intend to fall asleep. Not 30 minutes, 60. Melatonin release is gradual, and it needs that full window to build up properly once bright light exposure stops. If you currently scroll until the moment you fall asleep, this single change alone will do more for your cardiovascular recovery overnight than almost anything else in this video. The second adjustment involves where your phone physically is in the room. I tell every one of my patients the same thing. Charge your phone across the room, not on your nightstand. This does two things at once. It removes the temptation to pick it up the moment you feel restless, and it takes your alarm clock function away from your phone, which means you no longer need it within arm's reach in the first place. If you need an alarm, a $5 analog alarm clock does the job just as well without the blue light and without the notifications waiting to pull you back in. The third adjustment is about replacing the habit, not just removing it. Your brain has built a routine around that pre-sleep window, and simply telling yourself to stop scrolling rarely works on its own. Replace it with something that actively lowers your heart rate instead of activating it. A few minutes of slow breathing, in for 4 counts, out for 6, is enough to measurably lower cortisol and heart rate within minutes. The reason that particular ratio matters is simple. A longer exhale than inhale directly stimulates the vagus nerve, the primary nerve responsible for activating your body's rest and recovery state. It's one of the few tools available to you that produces an almost immediate, measurable shift toward the calm state your heart needs before sleep. Reading a physical book under warm, dim light works well for the same reason. No blue light, no notifications, no algorithm designed to keep your attention activated. Even 10 minutes of this replacement habit done consistently retrains the association your brain has built between bedtime and stimulation, and over a few weeks, Most patients tell me they no longer even feel the pull toward the phone the way they used to. I also want to say something specifically to couples reading this together because I hear this often in my practice. One partner scrolling in bed frequently keeps the other partner awake as well, whether from the light, the small movements, or simply the awareness that someone beside you is still active and alert. If you share a bed with someone, this change protects two hearts, not just one. And it's worth having the conversation together rather than assuming it only applies to whichever one of you reaches for the phone first. The fourth adjustment applies specifically if you sleep with any degree of untreated snoring or breathing irregularity, which is extremely common after 60. Falling asleep in an activated, elevated heart rate state on top of an already compromised airway compounds the risk considerably. If you scroll on your phone before bed and you also snore heavily, addressing the phone habit becomes even more important because you are stacking two cardiovascular stressors directly on top of each other during the exact hours your heart can least afford it. The fifth and final adjustment is the simplest of all, and it's the one my patients are most surprised by. Move your bedtime routine 15 minutes earlier than you think you need to. Most people scroll on their phones specifically because they don't feel tired yet when they get into bed. If you begin your wind down period 15 minutes earlier using slow breathing or reading instead of a screen, you give your body the time it actually needs to transition naturally into sleep, rather than forcing yourself to lie in the dark, scrolling simply because you're not yet tired enough to close your eyes. There's one more layer of this I want to mention, because it explains why simply telling yourself to scroll less rarely works in practice. The apps most people use before bed are not designed to release you easily. Every scroll, every refresh, every new headline is engineered to deliver a small hit of dopamine and a small hit of stress in almost equal measure. And that combination is precisely what makes it so hard to put down, even when you're exhausted, even when you know you should stop. This isn't a matter of willpower or discipline. It's a designed feedback loop, and understanding that it's designed rather than a personal failing is often the first step my patients need before they can actually change the habit. You are not weak for struggling to put the phone down. You are responding exactly the way the app was built to make you respond. Knowing that changes the way you approach fixing it. Let's bring this together into something you can actually use tonight. 60 minutes before bed, put the phone down completely. Charge it across the room, not beside your pillow. Replace the scrolling with slow breathing or a physical book under dim light. If you snore or suspect any breathing irregularity, treat this adjustment as non-negotiable, not optional, and shift your entire wind-down routine 15 minutes earlier so you're not lying there restless with nothing to do but reach for your phone out of habit. I want to speak to you honestly for a moment, not as a content creator, but as a surgeon who has spent more nights than I can count standing over an open chest at 3 in the morning. I have talked to families in waiting rooms at dawn who had no idea anything was wrong when they said good night just hours earlier. And more times than I'd like to admit, when I ask about their loved one's evening routine, I hear some version of the same story. Television, then bed, then the phone. Scrolling until sleep simply took over. Nobody thinks of that as a risk factor. Nobody warns you about it at your annual checkup. But after everything I've seen in more than 20 years of this work, I can tell you it belongs on the list. And for most people, it belongs near the very top. Here's the truth I want you to leave with tonight. Your heart doesn't fail because of dramatic, rare events most of the time. It fails because of small, repeated patterns that quietly wear down its margin for safety over years. A phone scrolled through in bed doesn't feel like a cardiovascular risk factor. It feels like relaxation. But now you know what's actually happening underneath that feeling: the suppressed melatonin, the elevated cortisol, the delayed entry into deep restorative sleep, pushed directly into the most dangerous hours of the night. That's not a small detail. That's the worst thing most people over 50 do before sleep, and almost nobody realizes it. So tonight, I want you to try something different. Put the phone down 60 minutes before bed. Charge it across the room. Pick up a book instead. or simply breathe slowly in the dark for a few minutes. Give your heart the calm, uninterrupted transition into sleep that it has been missing for years without you ever knowing it. I know some of you watching this will try it tonight and notice almost nothing different tomorrow morning. That's expected, and it's actually a good sign, not a disappointing one. This isn't the kind of change that produces a dramatic, overnight transformation you can feel. It's the kind of change that lowers your risk quietly, night after night, the same way the original habit raised it quietly, night after night. You won't feel your heart rate variability improving. You won't feel your cortisol curve normalizing. But over months and years, this is exactly the kind of small, consistent adjustment that separates the patients I see for a routine checkup from the ones I see for emergency surgery. I would much rather you be bored by how uneventful this change feels than have you sitting across from me one day wishing someone had told you sooner. I'd like to ask you something, and I genuinely want to see your answer in the comments below. Be honest with yourself for a moment. Is your phone the last thing you touch before you fall asleep most nights? I have a feeling the answer for most of you watching this is yes. You are not alone, and now, more importantly, you know exactly what to do about it. If this video helped you understand something about your own evening routine, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. A spouse who falls asleep scrolling every night? A parent living alone? A sibling who's always on their phone in bed? This is the kind of information that's easy to overlook and easy to pass along in under a minute. Take care of your heart tonight. It has been working for you every single minute of your life without asking for anything in return. Give it the quiet, undisturbed hour it needs before you close your eyes. One final note, everything I've shared with you today reflects current research on sleep physiology and cardiovascular health, along with my own clinical experience treating patients for more than 20 years. It is general information, not a personalized medical recommendation. If you have an existing heart condition or you're concerned about your cardiovascular risk, please speak with your own physician before making changes to your routine. That's not just a formality. It's sincere advice, and I genuinely hope you're still watching this channel 10 years from now. Good night, and starting tonight, put the phone down and take care of your heart.